What's going on, everybody? It's Ryzeal coming at you with a brand new video, and I'm very excited today to bring to y'all my updated Goblin Biker deck profile for the January 2025 format post Supreme Darkness. Now, it's been a little bit since I've made an update to this deck, but we did just get the new support out of Supreme Darkness, but also, most importantly, I managed to get my hands on the engine that seems to make every deck better, or at least really makes this deck better, that being the Fiendsmith package. I really like how the engines interact with each other with this deck. I feel like the Fiendsmith engine does so much for Goblin Biker, to the point where I genuinely think this is like a scary meta threat, especially if you're playing Ryzeal, but even in general, I feel like this deck can put in a lot of work this format, and I've been doing just that. I managed to go undefeated at my last locals, and then I went X1, I believe, at the one before that, and I've been doing very solid in testing as well. And I had a lot of people asking for the deck list when I posted about it on Twitter, and so I figured, why not go ahead and make a new video. But with that being said, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get right into my Fiendsmith Goblin Biker deck profile for the January 2025 format, post Supreme Darkness. Starting off with what else but our Goblin monsters. We have 2 copies of Goblin Bikers Gone Wild, 3 copies of Goblin Biker Doug Charger, 2 copies of Goblin Biker Clatter Sploder, 1 copy of Goblin Biker Mean Merciless, and 1 copy of Goblin Biker Boom Mock. We're playing it relatively simple with our ratio of the main deck Goblin monsters. 2 Gone Wild is something that I wasn't playing before. I was just playing the 1, more so as something to attach during the end phase from Gabanga, and as a last resort, something to summon from deck for Breakout, so that we could continue our combos, and that is technically what we are still using it for. However, we are using 1 for each purpose, 1 for either Breakout or a normal summon, or 1 for the Gabanga attach, so we have 1 for each. And also, Gone Wild is actually much better as a normal summon in Fiendsmith Goblin Biker than it is compared to like the pure build that I was playing before, because compared to the pure build, where if you normal summon Gone Wild and get hit with an imperm, and then you have like a psychic wielder in your hand you can't use, or an e-telly or whatever, for example, there's not much you could do compared to if you had a tour guide, for example, get impermed, and then you get to extend into your Gabanga. But if you have that same e-telly with a Gone Wild getting negated, now you can just go into your full Fiendsmith combo and not bat an eye. The same logic goes for Doug, whereas Doug was a pretty bad 1-card starter in the pure build. It was just kind of like the bare minimum end board. It was like a Lancer maybe, and if you got super lucky with an extender, you get your Gabanga, so like the bare minimum combo. Now it's like actually really good for the Fiendsmith build, because again, you don't have to have those exact levels all the time. You can at least go into a Fiendsmith combo, which is very strong. So I'm always still going to be on the 2 copies of Clatter Sploder, because the second copy comes up so often. There are so many games where if I didn't have a second copy, I would have 100% lost or have been at a very large disadvantage, because having that follow-up Clatter to search off a Gabanga or a Grand Entrance or summon off a Breakout or whatever is just so crucial for those follow-up plays. Outside of the Fiendsmith package, the deck can struggle a little bit in a grind game, because that is one thing about the Fiendsmith package, is that it takes up a lot of your extra deck, and so that's like probably your biggest grind potential, whereas your goblins are kind of just okay. But Clatter Sploder being at 2 copies in this deck makes it a lot better, because you use 1 for your combo and then have 1 to search for later, getting access to any package you really want, whether it be another Gabanga, whether it be going back into the moon to loop your Fiendsmith package again, etc. There was also a situation in my last locals, for example, where it was in a really like tight game 3 against a Fiendsmith cash pile. I was playing Argo Star as its 3rd engine of choice, which was interesting. And it was one of those games where both players kind of knew what the other was going to do, or was kind of like out loud saying, oh, that means you're going to do this, or maybe you can go for this, or whatever. We were like pseudo helping each other, but at the same time, we were kind of just like helping prep ourselves. I really like those kinds of games, by the way. Some of my favorite games of Yu-Gi-Oh! But my opponent actually was aware of how Goblin Biker worked, because he played it when it first came out. He played it at the pre-release. He played like a Horus build, I think. And so he was like saying a 1-line that I could go for, and I was like, I could, but it's a good thing that I do play the second copy of Clatter. And he was like, oh shit, because he really didn't expect it. And it's just really strong. Mean Merciless has been at 1 for my last list, maybe 2 lists actually on the channel, I'm not sure, because Mean Merciless kind of isn't great to open, especially when you're playing, you know, all these different packages, the Fiendsmith, the Terror Tops, the Tour Guides, all that, where Mean just feels like the worst normal summon in your hand, because chances are if you normal summon a Mean and activate effect, your opponent's going to assume your hand is terrible, and they're just going to straight up shotgun an Imperm, and you probably lose, so not super great, but she is mostly there for Tour Guide. She is still a very, very strong card, but a lot of the time she's actually getting linked off for a Moon. Or she's staying in the deck until like turn 3, where I can search her off of a Gabonga or a Grand Entrance to get all my names live, so I can go for as many bodies as possible. And then Boom Mock, I'm not sure if my last deck profile had Boom Mock at 2, because I actually did play it at 2 for Crossover Breakers format, because it is very, very strong into Ryzeal, but this card's also strong into a lot of other, like, different matchups. Anything with Fiendsmith is actually a really good matchup for Boom Mock, because Boom Mock can activate on the Caesar, and unless they're really silly and they don't understand how it works, like my Ryzeal opponent, Fiendsmith Ryzeal opponent at my last locals, and just, like, negates it, they're going to have to force out bare minimum 1 Caesar material and give you a free body on board. So it's basically a disruption and an inherent summon on the same time, and it feels very strong into that. It's also good, for example, I was playing against Ubel 2 locals ago, and they put out Varudris, not knowing how Boom Mock worked as well, and I activated the Boom Mock, ate both materials, felt really good. So yeah, Boom Mock can do a lot to this format. So basically, it's a free body. You can totally play multiple copies of it if you'd like, but I think just the 1 is perfectly fine, because it's not like the be-all, end-all, but if you happen to open it against those decks, it feels very good. Separating the video into more of an engine sort of way, instead of like just monster spells and traps, we're going to go into the Goblin Biker spells and traps, or I should say just the spells, because we're playing 3 copies of Grand Entrance, 3 copies of Grand Breakout, and the 1 copy of Grand Bash. You'll notice that I'm still not main decking the Pile Up, even though we do have Gone Bonkers now, formerly known as Kick-Ass Goblin Bikers. I don't feel like Pile Up is still worth maining, because I just hate the idea of playing a lot of different, like, one-of trap cards that I want to search and don't really want to draw, especially going second. It's actually the reason why I cut the Lavirtue Dragon package, which I actually did take a lot of advice from my last video on the deck, where a lot of people in the comments were saying, have you tried the Lavirtue Dragon package? And I was like, oh, it doesn't look too great, but it actually does feel really good when you can end on it, you know, it is pretty solid. But it would, not only was it a little bit awkward, but drawing the Virtue Stream, especially also playing a deck that's playing the Full Armored Exceed, so that's another trap card brick you don't want to draw, it didn't really feel super great, admittedly. And so it, like, kind of ended up going to the side, and then I ended up just cutting it entirely, because it just did not feel very nice to have that trap card in my hand at any point. Which is why I currently have the Pile Up and the Crazy Beast as well to go along with it delegated to the side deck. I feel like it is a much better place for it, for when I know I'm going first, and that if I draw it, I can at least use it, you know? But the rest of the ratios are pretty standard, I think, for a Goblin-heavy deck. We are playing the 3 copies of Grand Entrance, because not only is it great into Ryzeal, which I'll probably not mention as much into the rest of the video, because let's be real, this whole deck is good into Ryzeal, 2-0 sweep easy. But it's also just 3 more copies of your Doug and or your Gone Wild, so it's like a really good 1-card starter. I think in total, if you count the Breakout as well as a 1-card starter, you have like 15 1-card starters, so it actually feels really, really good now. Thank God for the Fiendsmith package. And then the Grand Bash, I know some people aren't playing it anymore, but I do still really like it for basically all of its effects. The attack boost is really, really relevant when you're trying to push for a lot of damage or keep your board safe, because a lot of people can't actually beat over like a 3000 attack Gabonga all the time. Being able to change things into 6s can come up for when you're making Caesar, or of course your Gone Bonkers or Crazy Beast, but most importantly, I really do like that additional normal summon, especially if I have something like a Gone Wild or a Clatter Sploder in your hand, because you can always go for something like a Tour Guide, right? Or, you know, maybe even go like play it super safe and like normal summon a Boom Mock and then special a Psychic Wielder or something, go for your combo, get nibbed, and then at the end of the day, you still have your regular normal summon, or additional one I should say, for your actual good 1-card starter. And it's become even more relevant with the Fiendsmith package, because you can do exactly what I just said, but go for the Fiendsmith line first, get hand trapped, and then use your actual starter for your Goblin plays. Moving on to the other engines that count as honorary Goblin bikers, we have 3 copies of Terratop alongside the 1 copy of that stupid robot that I hate. And then we also, of course, have 3 copies of Tour Guide. These are basically the best starters in the deck that aren't just your Goblins or Fiendsmith cards. Terratop, especially, is by far the best starter in the deck, because if you see it with any of your other starters, which, again, outside of the Terratops, you have like 12 other 1-card starters between the Grand Entrance, the Tour Guide, the Dug, the Gone Wild, etc., then you can use the Terratops to go into the Fiendsmith package to go for nib protection or just hand trap protection in general, or even just a general insulation like cushion to be like, hey, if my Goblin stuff gets stopped, at least I have a Desiree or a Caesar on board, right? As opposed to back when Terratop was literally just, okay, I'm gonna make a Gossip Shadow and pray that they don't have like an Imperm or something, right? So Terratop feels a lot better than it did when it comes to being an insulator card. And then Tour Guide, I think, is slightly worse than Gone Wild now, but it's still very, very strong. Being able to summon that Mean Merciless from the deck still feels incredible, and just having a lot of 1-card starters is really good, even if it does kind of put your deck like at a weird space when it comes to normal summons. It actually was relevant in a Mimighoul matchup at my last locals, because game 2 I just had the like insta-scoop because I had like Tour Guide, Terratop, Gone Wild, like a bunch of normal summons in my hand, or Terratop that required my board to be empty, and they had the field spell up. It's like, what am I gonna do? But other than niche situations like that, it feels like really, really good. And these are really good starter cards, except for Takatomborg, obviously just being part of the starter cards. But in terms of extenders, we are also playing the 3 copies of Emergency Teleport, and I'm actually playing 1 copy each of Psychic Tracker and Wielder. So I actually did end up cutting the Ghost Ogres as well as the Nyan Nyan from the deck. I really do like Nyan Nyan, don't get me wrong, just not so much in a Fiendsmith variant of Goblin, because you don't want to get locked out of your Link monsters when you really want to make your Link monsters, and we're not playing Cherubini anymore, and so there's not like a super duper easy way to access the Nyan Nyan now. And Ogre, I feel like, isn't like super crazy in like the limited space we do have for non-engine in this deck, compared to like other hand traps we could play. So I ended up just basically cutting those and then adding a copy of the Psychic Wielder, and I really like these cards because either they're extenders from the deck using E-Tele, or they're extenders from the hand just by being able to bring themselves out from the hand, compared to something like Nyan Nyan, which just felt like a major brick in the hand when you drew it, because you just couldn't really do much unless you already had the E-Tele, or if you had an extender like the Tracker. These cards have gotten me out of a lot of sticky situations when I do get hand trapped, and so I really do like having them in the deck. And now, it's time for the moment you've been waiting for. It's just a pretty simple Fiendsmith package. We have 1 copy of Engraver, 1 copy of Lacrima, and we are playing the 1 copy of Tract and 1 Lurie. So, I really could rant for ages about how much I love this engine, but I feel like everyone kind of knows at this point what the Fiendsmith engine does and how good it is. In this deck in particular, you're usually using the Fiendsmith stuff not just as an endboard piece, which you totally can if you're going through like your basic combo. You only have the 1 starter card. You'll go for your Goblin stuff, your Xyz armor stuff, and then finish it off with a Caesar or Desiree on your board. But what I really like most about the Fiendsmith package is actually using it first compared to the rest of your engine, because this deck's biggest weakness for the longest time was 100% Nibiru, other than like, you know, Droll and Shifter, of course, you could at least sometimes play through that, but Nibiru was a massive downfall, and while Breakout did help with that, it wasn't really enough. But now, if you start with something like an Engraver, a Lacrima, or a Tract, or I guess technically Lurie if you want to use your normal summon on that, you can just easily go for the Caesar super duper early, force your opponent to either nib you there or have to deal with the Caesar afterwards, and if they do nib you, then congratulations, you probably still have your normal summon and can just go for the rest of your Goblin combo. And the reason we're playing the Tract and the Lurie, but we're not playing something like the Fiendsmith in Paradise, right, was that I was actually just playing the Engraver and the Lacrima, but there was a lot of hands where I opened the Engraver and it just didn't do anything, because unlike Requiem, who can summon from hand or deck, Lacrima can only dump from the main deck. So Lacrima couldn't dump an Engraver in your hand to get it out of your hand, and so you'd have to go Requiem, summon the Engraver from hand, you don't get your full combo. It just felt really, really bad. So I figured, why not just add a card that's literally a free starter slash extender that doesn't use my normal summon at the cost of playing 1 brick in like my 45 card deck, you know? I mean, technically Lacrima's also slightly a brick, but you can at least full combo if you normal summon that. And the cool thing is that these cards are very strong together, but they're also like the most cuttable cards in the deck when you're looking to side out stuff. So whenever I want to put something in like, you know, my evenly matches, my Lancias, my stuff like that, I can just take out the Tract and the Lurate, and that's 2 free spaces right away at the cost of like maybe drawing the Engraver for the next game, but then I can just back up on my side cards, you know, which is a whole different story. Overall, I'm gonna stop rambling a little bit here. I just really love what the Fiendsmith package does for the deck. I feel like this is 100% the strongest variant of Goblin you can play. I'm really excited to keep playing this deck in the future, and I just really hope that Engraver gets a reprint sometime soon, because it feels so unfair that so many people were so unlucky to be like unable to play this engine. For the last like quote-unquote engine card, we have this stupid trap card that I hate, the Full Armored Xyz. Very good when you do get to search it during your combo, not so great when you draw it, especially going second, but at the end of the day, you do have to play it for your Xyz armor package, and this is the only one that I'm playing. I'm not playing like the spell card and stuff. I don't know how people actually end up wanting to play those cards. They're kind of bad, but the Full Armored Xyz does his job very well. And finally, moving on to the non-engine, we're actually fortunate enough to play like 13 non-engine here if you count the called by, which is pretty cool. We are on 3 copies of Ash Blossom, 3 copies of Imperm, 3 copies of Nibiru, 3 copies of Forbidden Droplets, and 1 copy of Called By. So in terms of importance, I basically wanted to use the things that I felt had the most impact that weren't like a direct thing, obviously like Lancia for Malice. And I feel like Ash is very good, not just because it's Ash Blossom, so it hits a lot of like lower tier matchups, of course, but it's also good against the Mole Charmies, most importantly. And you know, ththings like Perulia and Fuwalos can hurt a little bit against you. You don't want to like force your opponent to make you, or have your opponent force you to make a smaller board, I should say. Imperm is just generically really good into things like Ryzeal, of course, hitting things like the Duo Drive, or if you have another hand trap, you can always just hit like the Ice on summon. But it's also very good into Malice, regardless of what people actually tell you. They'll be like, oh yeah, but they're gonna set a card, what if it's the trap card? Folks, they have literally 3 trap cards in their deck, 1 of each, and 1 of them isn't even live immediately. So that would literally be 2 cards in a 40+ card deck that could stop your Imperm, unless they're playing Signet Backdoor. Just Imperm the White Rabbit, y'all. It's not that deep. I like Nibiru because, similar to Ash, it hits a lot of lower tier matchups, but it's also very good into Malice because even if it doesn't fully stop them from playing the game, because, you know, they can go into Link Spider and, you know, combo a little bit from there, maybe like Splash Mage if they haven't already, then you can at least force them to play a different route and then have probably less disruptions. And also, again, it's mostly just really good for a lot of lower tier matchups. Also not terrible into Ryzeal. You can at least, like, especially if it's not like the Fiendsmith variant, you can make them have to play differently. And then Droplet, I know Droplet's a little weird in a format where, like, one of the best decks is technically playing Shifter, but I still really like it because that forces them to have the Shifter, and, like, you know, if they have the Shifter, they have the Shifter, you weren't going to have a good time anyway. But I think Droplet's, like, a lot better than something like a Dark Ruler No More, or a Book of Eclipse, because I feel like Dark Ruler isn't reactive enough, and not being able to use it super fast makes it really bad in matchups like Malice. And then I feel like Book of Eclipse is just too targeted for something like Ryzeal, when this deck already has an insanely easy matchup into Ryzeal due to just inherently how the deck works. So I just want something that's like a good blanket thing that can help me break boards, especially in a format where it feels like hand traps aren't super relevant outside of very specific niche ones like Lancia. And then finally, we are playing a kind of tier 2-ish or below deck, so we do want to play the one called by, just so we don't get our stuff shut off. Fun fact, I actually hit an Engraver with that at my last locals against Ubel, and it was really funny. Hey y'all, it's Future Aurora here because I like 100% forgot to put this in the video as I was recording it because I was in a rush. But as a heads up, if you want a new separate video for a combo tutorial for the Fiendsmith variant of this deck, I will post one if this video hits 200 likes. I know I usually keep it like super simple, I go from like 50 to 100, but y'all have absolutely like massacred the last few goals that I made, so I figured I'd shoot a little bit higher and go for 200 this time. So just a reminder, if you want to make sure that there is a combo tutorial for this video, then be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already. Without further ado, let's get back into the video. Finally, moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Goblin Biker Big Gabonga and the one brand new, straight from Supreme Darkness himself, Goblin Bikers Gone Bonkers. What a funny ass name they could have given it. So, of course, I'm not going to really explain very much about Gabonga. I mean, Gabonga is Gabonga, super good card. But Gone Bonkers is something I wanted to talk about a little bit because while I do like the idea of the card, it isn't amazing. I mean, even with Pile Up, I actually ended up not going for it the 2 times that I did use Pile Up. I went ahead and just went straight for a Crazy Beast. But Gone Bonkers does have its applications, and I feel like it's more so as a card where if you have access to it very late into a combo, especially after you went through all of your opponent's resources, it's a very good cleanup card. Being able to attach a bunch of things at once, especially if you have a bash on board in order to make it, and then that boosts all your dude's attack, it's gonna feel really, really good trying to push for game there. And it's also good in case you aren't able to go for game because it does have that on the opponent's turn effect as well. I just feel like it is slightly worse than Crazy Beast in terms of overall effects, even if it is a bit easier to use the effect, if you know what I mean, because Crazy Beast feels better into back row matchups or matchups where they're gonna nuke your board like Tenpai, but I feel like Crazy Beast protection and the graveyard effect especially are way better than Gone Bonkers overall. But I feel like Gone Bonkers just has overall more applications, even though I'll admit I actually haven't summoned this card at all yet. We are, of course, playing the Xyz armor package as always, with the 1 Torpedo, 1 Fortress, and 1 Lancer. Also, not very much to explain here that I haven't explained in all of my other videos. Torpedo's good for drawing cards or for just being a material bank. Fortress grabs your trap card, and Lancer is pretty cool overall. So when I was building this list, I'm not playing the Unchained stuff, right, that I know a lot of other Fiendsmith variants are playing. So I ended up having a little bit of room, especially, or specifically I should say, for 1 card to keep from my previous Goblin Biker list. And out of all the ones that I kept, instead of something like a Shuriken for damage or even Zeus when it came to board wiping, I actually decided to keep Bamboozling Gossip Shadow, and oh my god, I am so glad that I did. I know a lot of lists aren't playing Gossip Shadow anymore because you can already set up negates with the Desiree and stuff like that, and it just doesn't feel as crazy. You can already negate Nib with Caesar, you know. There's a lot of things that Gossip Shadow did that the Fiendsmith engine can do for it, but one thing I really have been loving lately, especially about Gossip Shadow, isn't just for the Nib installation or having something to summon off the full Armored Xyz, which was its main reason I included it in here again, was because I really wanted to have something to summon off the trap if I already went for Lancer. But the biggest thing that I've really been enjoying about it is when I'm going second and I have something like Terror Top plus another starter card, or even multiple starter cards, and I just use the Terror Top stuff. They're not going to stop that. They're going to wait until you go Gabonga or Moon or whatever. I just go Gossip Shadow instead, and now my whole turn is insulated unless they want to give me a free draw. Granted, they also get to draw, but it's very likely that you'll draw gas as opposed to them drawing something that'll really heavily stop you. So it feels insanely good in that regard. And at the end of the day, if they do have something to negate it, I don't know, randomly, something on summon that would get rid of it or something, you do have effects like Boom Mock that can just use the materials or something. It came up basically 3 out of my 4 matches at my locals where I set up literally the Gossip Shadow first, and then I started comboing off, and they just kind of had to sit there and think about how they wanted to sequence their stuff, and it came up insanely well against Yubel, insanely well against Ryzeal for the Nib, and it just felt super, super good. Speaking of Yubel, think of this as basically Phantom of Yubel, just slightly harder to make, I guess, but still very rewarding. And for the other, basically half of the extra deck, we of course have our Fiendsmith stuff. We have the 1 copy of Moon that allows you to go into the 1 copy of Requiem. That way you can branch into either sequence into the Agdam Day with the Desiree for a very large Omni Negate, or if you want to play a little bit more generically, in my opinion, as opposed to a game 2 or 3 choice, which I think Desiree is, you can also go for the Caesar package with the Necroquip and the Caesar. So instead of Moon, I was playing the, I think it was Tempo or Musa Rhythm, whichever one's the light fiend, like this deck played. I was testing that, and it was pretty funny, and being able to use the materials was pretty cool at times, but I noticed that it doesn't really come up as often as I might think it does. Like, I ended up having so many situations, similar to how I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Gone Wild, having an E-Telly not being able to do anything with it. It just was so much easier to just make a Moon and then go full combo because it required easier materials, and speaking of materials, the Jhin didn't really do anything. Like, yeah, I could use the materials sometimes, but a lot of the time I was just either taking one material or I was just straight up raw dog linking it off because it just didn't come up. So basically, that's why I ended up going to Moon. As I mentioned, Desiree feels a lot stronger as like either a going second package to actually go for an OTK or like stop a little bit of follow-up, or in a game 2 or 3 scenario when you're scared of something like evenly matched, which could be a problem. As opposed to Caesar, which actually generically hits a lot of things more, except for like Ryzeal, for example, because Ryzeals are all inherent summons, unfortunately. Desiree is definitely better there. But one of your like worst matchups is definitely Malice, and this card absolutely fucks Malice like really hard. And then it's super easy to go into, plus, not to mention, like I said earlier, Nibiru is a very strong card into this deck, and so making the Caesar just insulates you from Nibiru, and they have to stop you from going into it, otherwise you're going to be able to fully combo off freely afterward. And then while I'm here, I might as well show off the last card in the extra deck. That's just the one copy of SP Little Knight. I honestly don't really make it too often. You don't need it all too often, but it is pretty cool when you can like link off an extra body you have, plus the sequence to go into an SP and then still be able to use the sequence effect. It's just really good for breaking apart things that you otherwise couldn't break, like a massive Nib token or something, like a really, really big one, and then like just not be able to push for damage. You just like stall on some disruptions, which is pretty cool, especially when you have the Fiendsmith stuff for the follow-up. And that is going to do it for my Goblin Biker Fiendsmith list. I really hope y'all did enjoy. I've been having so much fun with this deck. I'm so excited to keep playing it in this upcoming format. I feel like it's very strong into a lot of the decks, and I just really hope that we get at least one more set of Diabellstar support so we can get a Sinful Spoils for this archetype, because it feels weird being the only Diabellstar archetype without a Sinful Spoils, but I don't know, maybe we'll just get some more awesome stuff that we can match with this deck in the future. But for now, that's gonna do it for the video. If you like it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended, and if you really like this content or somewhere like it, like the rest of my deck profiles, and of course a combo tutorial, remember to be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and help get this video to 200 likes. Also, if you want to support me directly while getting some awesome perks in the process, check out my Patreon down below to see what perks you can get from my $1 and $5 tiers, such as getting your name shouted out in the end of the video, as well as early video access to my PNGs that I use for thumbnails and during videos, and of course, being able to choose which decks go in my Sleeper Sunday polls. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.